Hello, and thank you for joining me for another episode of You Would Think. So today we're going to be on day 20 of the Lindsay Clancy trial. If you'll remember yesterday, or day 19 to whenever day we are watching this video, Dr. Heilbrun was on the stand for his direct testimony, and almost immediately he is talking about his evaluation of Lindsay, and he starts to go into the religious territory again, and prosecutors don't stop him. And once he mentions the mortal sin issue that they were chastised for last week, the defense objects and the judge immediately calls a sidebar. Then he had, recessed the jury, and Kevin Reddington had made a motion for a mistrial, claiming intentional misconduct and continual misconduct by the prosecution. He did not grant that. He recessed the jurors for the day. So now we are on day 20, and Dr. Heilbrun is back on the stand, continuing with his direct examination by prosecutors. So, full disclosure, I am not an attorney. I do not have a law degree. My degree is in crime scene technology and forensics. True crime and trials have always been a bit of a hobby of mine. So I thought, why not make a YouTube channel so that I could share that with like-minded people who also like those things. And I can get different perspectives, which is something else that I find very interesting. So make sure to put all your thoughts and comments, down in the comment section so that I may see them. And if you enjoy the content, please like and subscribe. And otherwise, let's get into it. So day 20 of Dr. Heilbrun's direct testimony. One thing also, any of my viewers who are lawyers or just who know the answer to this question, one thing I noted was, why are they allowing him to literally read from his notes? Usually you can give them their notes, they can refresh their memory, then they can get asked questions, and then they answer the questions. But this man has literally been allowed to read verbatim, potentially, from his notes. And I just don't understand why the defense isn't objecting to that. So if you know, please put in the comments. I would appreciate it very much, seeing as though I myself am not an attorney. Moving on. A couple things he said I thought was really interesting. He mentions things in a way, a couple things that we haven't heard before. I mean, we're on day 20, right? And it's just been like back-to-back experts for days. And some of the framing that Dr. Heilbrun puts into his conclusions, I appreciated. And I liked the change of pace, if you will. One of the things he did, now mind you, of course he's going to push back during this testimony because this is his direct testimony. He was hired by the government, the DA's office. Now the DA's office is questioning him. So they bring up the inconsistency with Lindsay telling him that right after she heard the voice, she immediately acted. There was no thinking, there was no decision making, she just acted. And he says that is fairly inconsistent because she showed a multitude of decision-making efforts she would have had to have made. I mean, one would think. We weren't there, we don't know, all we have is the evidence, and the evidence shows us she told him after she heard the voice that she didn't think, there was no decision-making. She just immediately went into the actions of strangling her 3 children and then trying to harm herself or kill oneself and jump out the window 20 feet down in January in Massachusetts. It's cold. So some of the decisions that she would have had to have made in order to get this done, he says, were things like, in what order to kill the children, what to use, how she was going to kill herself, and a few other reasons that they give. And you think about it and you go, I mean, that's technically correct, right? I mean, you would have had to have made those decisions. So it's just a little bit of showing some inconsistencies, some cracks, if you will, in what Lindsay told this doctor who went to Tewksbury and evaluated her for 3 days, 10 and a half hours in total. He went with Dr. Mack. You'll remember that train wreck. For the guy that testified before Dr. Heilbrun. They went together on 2 of the days. So all this information is coming from Dr. Heilbrun's evaluation of Lindsay for those 3 days, for those 10 and a half hours, and for all of the voluminous paperwork and medical records and criminal file that he was given to consider in his conclusion. So after the decision-making comment, he mentions that on the 3rd day of the evaluations that her answers were a little more guarded. I guess that means the first 2 days that he was evaluating her, asking her questions. I think that the prosecution is trying to allege maybe she was like, whoops, shouldn't have told him that. Let's make sure I'm careful the next time because this could come back and bite me. I'm not really sure what they were insinuating, but that's what I got from it. Now, this part. I really want either your opinion or even just tell me, did you notice this as well? Because I haven't heard anyone else talk about it, and I don't know why. The phone call, okay? He says on direct that, yes, it would be unusual for somebody during an act of psychosis to be able to, remember she missed that call from Pat, and then she called him back 14 seconds later, and Patrick said it sounded like maybe she was in the middle of something. He says that it's extremely unusual that a person in the throes of psychosis would be able to not only take a phone call, but to call somebody back, have a normal conversation with them without raising any serious red flags, and then continue with the behavior after that break. Okay, that made sense to me. But remember that, because we're going to come back to it. But I can't do that until the next witness. So keep that in your frame of reference. Next, we'll see a little video where he's kind of, this was one of those parts I appreciated as far as him saying some things in maybe a slightly different way. He was asked if Lindsay was suffering from a mental disease or defect at the time of the alleged crime. And in his, they say, training and experience, he concluded that she was suffering from bipolar 2, which is something that's been said by numerous experts. The bipolar thing has come up with Dr. Zeisel, Dr. Spinelli, even though we haven't heard from her, Dr. Gelato, and I believe that there was one more expert in there, or medical professional, who have all kind of paired the bipolar with the mania symptoms and somehow, shape, or form putting that into a form of psychosis. But just like I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a psychiatrist either. He says that she was able to appreciate the wrongfulness of her actions. Legally speaking, and morally, and I'll let him explain it because he explains it better, but the difference in those two things I really thought was a great way to frame that answer. So we'll look at that real quick.
I noticed when I evaluated her in April is that she is still grieving. She's still in mourning for those kids. And she used language like, I have lost everything and I don't want to be here. So I would not think of Lindsay Clancy as someone who is really self-centered or oriented only to herself. She is grieving her children.
And you mentioned yesterday the emphasis she had on control of thought and control of her life. How did that come into play in your evaluation in terms of what was done here?
One of the considerations is why she got to the point where she decided to take her own life. And she's an individual who, for most of her life, has been disciplined and liked to control things, liked to work hard, liked to accomplish things. And one of the things that was striking about what happened with her between October and January is that she seemed to be doing her best, talking to the doctors, talking to the therapists, working on trying to get things accomplished in terms of lessening the anxiety and getting the right medications. And it wasn't working, and she couldn't help make it work. She could not control that through hard work and discipline and so on. And that had to be very frustrating, and I think got her to the point where it was very difficult for her to actually think about not being hopeless and going on with her life and so on.
Now, doctor, did you form an opinion to a reasonable degree of psychological certainty as to whether or not the defendant was suffering from a mental disease or defect at the time she killed her children?
I did, yes.
And what is that opinion?
That opinion is yes, she was. She was experiencing bipolar 2 disorder, depressive symptoms, and there were other things that were exacerbating that, making it worse. One is the sleep problems and probably the continued adverse reactions to medication and so on. But yes, in my opinion, she did have a mental disease or defect on January 24th.
And doctor, to a reasonable degree of psychological certainty, did you form an opinion as to whether or not the defendant appreciated the criminality or wrongfulness of her conduct when she killed her children?
I did, yes. And I'm at the end of my report, I was very careful about how I phrased this, and so
sustain. If you could just answer the question regarding your opinion.
So yes, you formed an opinion?
I did, yes.
And what is that opinion?
That opinion is that she retained an awareness of the illegality of killing others, including killing her children. Her moral awareness of the wrongfulness of this killing was influenced by her strong desire to die, and, if she were dead, not to leave her children behind. Some of this perception was realistic. For example, my children will suffer without me because they would have suffered, I think. And some of it was distorted. For example, nobody else can care for my children. But her awareness of the illegality and moral wrongfulness of such killing is best appraised by understanding these acts as a serious suicide attempt combined with altruistic filicide, killing her children out of love, rather than as a response to command hallucinations.
And did you form an opinion to a reasonable degree of psychological certainty as to whether Ms. Clancy was able to conform her conduct to the requirements of the law when she killed her children?
Yes.
And what is that opinion?
That her capacity to conform her conduct to the requirements of the law is again best understood by considering the seriousness of her suicide attempt and her strong desire not to leave her children. She demonstrated such self-control throughout the day on January 24th, and her actions between 5:15 and 6 p.m. that afternoon were influenced by her depression and her hopelessness about her life and the desire to end the pain she had experienced since October. Although this depression and hopelessness influenced her decisions, she retained control over whether, when, and how she carried it out, and the inclusion of her children.
So he frames that in just, a little bit of a different way than some of the other experts had framed that thought process, including what he thought about what would cause a woman who every single human being that this person came in contact with in her entire life says the same things. She's a great person, great mother, great friend, right? She's just and you're trying to convince the jury that on January 24th of 2023, she just ups and decides to kill her children and then herself. I mean, the automatic thought process a person would have would be, you'd have to be psychotic. But that's what we've been listening to experts to for the last 3 or 4 days, trying to, on a psychiatric level, explain this phenomenon of what occurred to this woman on that day. And I like how he said that, Lindsay had always been a hard worker. She's always been very self-disciplined. And this is echoed through everyone that was spoken to regarding her. And the fact that she was reaching out to these professionals since September of 2022. I mean, therapists, inpatient hospital stays, suicide hotlines. There is no evidence at all that she was doing anything during September 2022 to January of 2023 that was anything less than begging for help. And the fact that she could not beat this with hard work or discipline, she couldn't get over it. She no matter what she tried, it was like she was not getting help. And that could have been a thought that maybe she had as to why, to kill oneself. But then the irrational thought process is, well, my kids are going to suffer without me. I'm going to take them out too. So it was a little bit of she knew maybe what she was doing legally, but did she know what she was doing morally? I mean, I just liked the way he framed that. So bottom line, he is asked if she met the criteria for Massachusetts for criminal responsibility. And he said yes. And remember, those two factors in Massachusetts for criminal responsibility is one, did the person have the ability to control their conduct? And the other one is, was the person able to appreciate right from wrong? And at least in Dr. Heilbrun's conclusion, she was able to do both of those things. So Then we get to cross. And I smile because, you know, I thought Alan Jackson from the Karen Reed trial was like the GOAT. But my God, I think him and Kevin Reddington have coffee. And the fact that they're both defending people in Massachusetts was kind of interesting too. It's like, well, Karen Reed was Massachusetts too. I don't know. But Kevin Reddington is he is a masterful trial attorney. I mean, really. And he is, in my opinion, just doing a great job. So, one thing that Kevin likes to do, right, is when the experts get on the stand, he likes to point out inconsistent theories or statements, their credibility as to their qualifications or lack thereof, like with Dr. Mack. That was hard to watch. Oh my God. And then he's made it a point, since I suppose the prosecution had asked his expert, Dr. Zeisel, how much money he made. So now Kevin has been asking every single attorney that has gotten up, who was retained by the district attorney's office, how much money they're making. And Dr. Heilbrun said he's making like $300 an hour. And he said he worked about 180 hours. So at this moment, it's somewhere around 54,000 is what he said. I don't do math. I hate math. I'm just going to go with whatever his math was correct. I don't really care. It doesn't matter to me. They went over the records that they were sent. The records, that way he can establish that these were the same records that all of these other experts also looked at. So there's no question there. He asks he asks if he has any postpartum psychosis experience. This man said in 1982, 44 years ago, he was in some type of group at the hospital, I'm assuming when he was in school, like training for his eventual career. And they were in a group, and one of the case studies was somebody with postpartum psychosis. But 44 years ago. And then he also pointed out that the scale and the science that was used 44 years ago to determine things regarding postpartum psychosis has dramatically changed in 2026. So it's pretty much like he should have just said no to if he had any postpartum psychosis experience. And then he was asked if he had an affiliation with, I think it's like Park Dietz and Associates, the same firm that Dr. Mack was consulting for. And I made a comment at that time. I'm like, you know what? Dr. Mack may have sank his own career yesterday or day 19, but if he's able to sink a fellow colleague's career just by being associated with him, woof. But so they're from the same consulting company, and that's why I said, Dr. Mack and Dr. Heilbrun, they had gone together to evaluate Lindsay. Dr. Mack went 2 days, and Dr. Heilbrun went 3 days. But for 2 of the days, they went together. He asked if he knew Avram Mack. He said yes. And then something that just struck me. So Kevin Reddington has his resume in front of him, right? And he starts reading off areas that this man throughout his career had consulted for. And this is just a few because I had to stop writing after a couple. But There was a food company. There was aviation, so pilots, I suppose, to evaluate their mental competency. Excuse me. He consulted with the FBI. He consulted in prisons, excuse me, including juveniles. He partook in the Walter Reed Medical Center, which was evaluating nurses. He did some work in sexual violence. He did some work regarding police. He did some work regarding violent risk assessments. And I mean, again, there were numerous other ones, but I had to stop writing. And my first thought was, why have you jumped around to so many different aspects? I mean, he has hit everything. I mean, damn, from a food company to sexual violence to prisons to pilots to nurses. My God. And then one of them, which I thought was funny, was he did workshops for prosecutors, defense attorneys, and judges on how to question or present an expert in the mental health field. This struck me because you're telling me that you are instructing the courts on how to present expert witnesses. But yesterday, you almost caused a mistrial by talking about religion? Well, that just doesn't make sense. Must be a really shitty workshop. Whatever. Dude said that his resume was 70 pages long. 70. I thought to myself, damn, he just must be using too big a font. But no, it's all of these areas that he's evaluated for. And he also puts in there, I believe, articles that he's published and things like that, which is fine. I don't know the parameters of what a resume should be like for an expert in a criminal trial such as this. I do know that it just struck me that the dude's thing was 70 pages long. I mean, my God, that's a lot. You know what I mean? Like, just a bunch of jumping around to different things. Like, I don't know. Usually they just kind of pick one or two things, you know what I mean, and run with it for 30, 40 years. But no, yeah, lots of jumping around. One of the other areas that he had examined or evaluated for was how to handle difficult cross-examinations. And Kevin thought that was funny. I thought that was funny. So, classic Kevin Runnington, all of the questions that he is going to ask, there's a reason, and that is a sign of a good defense attorney. And what he surmises from all the stuff that he had evaluated for and all the articles he read and all the information that this man provided as part of his expert resume, not one article on pregnant women, postpartum, or psychosis. So then you go back to when he was on direct testimony, right? He said that his conclusion, or not his conclusion, I'm sorry, the phone call that I wanted you to keep in your mind, and actually I'm not to that exact point yet, so I want you to still kind of keep that in your mind, but we're going to refer to it really quick, because he specifically says that it was unusual for a person to be able to take the phone call somebody back, have a break in the throes of psychosis. Well, sir, how can you say that it is unusual when you have 49 years total of experience and you don't have a single thing about pregnant women, postpartum, or psychosis? I would say that would deem you pretty unqualified to make that decision that you made. So he was good at making that point.
No,
she knew that you were there on behalf of the district attorney's office to testify against her in a trial and say to a jury that she knew and was able to conform to the law when she killed her 3 kids. Isn't that right?
No, that's not right.
So, your diagnosis is depressive bipolar 2, right?
Bipolar 2 disorder, right.
Okay. And that's a serious mental disease, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
You would agree with me, sir, that Lindsay is in your opinion, testified she's a very hardworking and highly self-disciplined individual, right?
Yes, I would agree with that.
You testified to that yesterday, right?
Yes, that's right.
Right, that's funny?
No, it's not funny. It's just that you asked me whether I agree with something that I testified to yesterday.
So what does that mean?
It means that I testified to it yesterday, and that means I do believe it. Yes.
Okay. So
I'm trying to just talk a little more on this one and not have so much video, because I'm just trying to kind of make these a little bit more digestible for people, you know what I mean? Because I figured, you know, I mean, if you're watching the trial, you've already seen the video. And the whole point is to get opinions off of each other. And so I thought I would go this route. So I'm sorry if I'm talking a lot. I'm just trying to see what works. And yet again, I would really like your feedback, you know, in the comment section, about, you know, what do you like? What parts work? What parts don't? What kind of trials would you like to see? Is there any specific trial you'd like to see? Just communicate with me. That was the whole point of this channel. So going back on track, he says, well, in 1977, just 49 years ago, that he did an article on psychosis with his dad. I don't think that's relevant, especially since so much has changed scientifically and the way that we look at mental health, the way we handle mental health, and the things that we are starting to need to pay attention to, which is why I'm obviously very saddened that 3 children had to lose their lives, but this trial is putting mental health under a spotlight, especially women's health. And I think that if anything good comes from this situation, it's that. Because we need to help our women. We need to support our women. Well, I'm getting off track and I apologize. So he mentions, you know, the issue of confirmation bias. He suggests that, you know, he talked with the DA a whole bunch of times before he went to evaluate Lindsay. So he kind of insinuates that he kind of already had his mind made up by the time he even went to talk to Lindsay. Of course, he says that that is not the case. He asks if he thinks that she was controlling, because remember in the opening statements by the prosecution, they alleged that she was controlling and manipulative and just didn't like the life she was living anymore. And he said no, that the medications that she was being given, starting with the Zoloft from Dr. Tufts in September of 22, we're just making things worse. So moving on to Dr. Saathop, Gregory Saathop. He is a professor of emergency medicine and works for the FBI's behavioral analysis unit as a forensic psychiatrist, and he's held that position since 1996. On direct, he says his job is to evaluate individuals and a lot of the times to determine criminal responsibility. He has testified for both the defense and prosecution in numerous cases. He said he testified roughly about 40 to 45 different trials. He had treated thousands of psychosis cases. The defense objects at that point and asks for a sidebar. When they come back from sidebar, he elicits to that psychosis is a symptom of a mental disorder, not a disorder in and of itself. Okay. Went over all of the medical records, and just like all the others, expert attorneys, they went over all the medical records. He says that the amount of information that he received in this case was not typical, like it was unusually large, which I think is just determining the fact that, yeah, these experts had plenty of records to go on so that nobody could say, well, they just didn't, look at her background. Well, yeah, they did. And they did it with a fine-tooth comb. Okay, so now I would like you to go to that thought that I asked you to remember regarding this statement from Dr. Heilbrun that Lindsay said that she was able to make a phone call back to Patrick during the throes of a psychosis, indicating that, and she'd said this previous times too, that the first time she heard the voice was roughly after Pat left, which was around 5:15. But apparently what she told this expert was after the phone call with Patrick is when she heard the voices. To my knowledge, this is the only time and the only expert that has ever said she heard voices after the call with Patrick. And if that's true, not only is there about a 20-minute time difference there, which is very important, but also that Dr. Heilbrun said, yeah, it would be unusual for somebody to be in the throes of psychosis and be able to break and make a phone call. Well, if the voice didn't happen until after that phone call, that makes the previous statement irrelevant and also inconsistent, which is something to kind of keep in mind. So I was just curious if anyone else had seen or heard that as well, because I thought that was extremely telling. Then a couple things that he says that struck him as unusual was that she never reported the voices to anyone before or after that day. He said that it was unusual that the voices stopped. Apparently, as soon as she was done strangling Callan, she said the voices stop. And also unusual because he has worked with people who have command hallucinations, like Dr. Resnick was talking about, the guy that treated Dahmer and Unabomber and, that guy. Those things would have just been very unusual, and they're not common. And, for the defense's last witness, or not the defense, I'm sorry, the prosecution's last witness, what were they, saving the best for last? I mean, here we're finally getting an expert with the right background, who's not a scumbag, who is testifying very clearly and has, extraordinary background and experience in this particular topic. So I'm not really sure what they were doing. I just know that they put their case together like a do-it-yourself project. I swear. I don't know if they just weren't anticipating a defense as vigorous as with Kevin Reddington, or if they just treat all their cases like this. I don't know, but All I know is from this and Karen Reed, I'm keeping my happy ass out of Massachusetts. So after he mentions the few things that are unusual, the defense objects again, and he says that he wants to have like a mini hearing to test his knowledge of the subject. And the judge overrules that, doesn't allow it.
And when reviewing the records and speaking to Ms. Clancy, did you see or notice any delusional statements or beliefs surrounding the hearing of that voice on the 24th?
No, I didn't.
Now, based on your training experience, is it typical for someone in psychosis to hear a voice and immediately act on it?
No.
And why is that?
I'd like to have a Dobia hearing at this point, Judge, on this. I'd like to test his qualifications to this.
I'm going to, same objection, same ruling.
So your opinion is it's not typical, correct?
Correct.
Now, you mentioned the defendant told you that when she received the call from her husband at 5:33 and called him back at 5:34, that she was getting dinner ready for her children, correct?
Yes.
And did she tell you what she was about to get out of the refrigerator?
Yes. She said she was at the refrigerator and that the refrigerator door was open and that she was getting chicken nuggets out of the refrigerator section for her children.
The prosecution also asks if it's typical for somebody suffering with psychosis to hear the voice so suddenly and have it just leave so suddenly. And again, he said that that was unusual. They keep referencing Dr. Spinelli, and we've heard of Dr. Spinelli, you know, kind of peppered through this whole trial, in a sense, regarding the experts, but we never actually heard from her. I don't know why that is, but I know that they're able to reference her statements because they're in the medical records that were provided to the experts. So that's why they're able to reference from Dr. Spinelli without actually calling Dr. Spinelli. That was the majority of day 20. And we will be back tomorrow in day 21 with the cross-examining, well, they're going to finish their direct testimony of Dr. Saathop, and then we'll also have the defense's cross-examination of him. So thank you guys so much for joining me for another episode of You Would Think. Again, comment anything you'd like, any specific things you'd like to see, things that work, things that don't. Your opinion. I'd love to know at this point where you stand, what you think. And otherwise, if you enjoyed the video, just like and subscribe. And have a great rest of your day.